I'm here in the Cherry Hill Public Library. I'm here with two veterans from World War II. I'm sorry, you're from?
Vietnam.
Vietnam War, sorry. Do you think the government has lied to us in regards to the events of 9/11?
They certainly lied about going into Iraq. About the events of 9/11, well, I don't know. Right now, even I see where a lot of the Democrats in Washington are thinking that the commission report, the 9/11 Commission, Tom Kane Sr. report, is pretty good, something to go on. I think that's a cover-up. I think it would come out in history that was a big cover-up. And what I read on the previews of this new movie we're going to see today, apparently even the kin of the people who died in the trade tower, World Trade Towers on 9/11, are complaining about the way they've been treated, haven't been told anything. And I don't know right now, we think it's a conspiracy theory that those buildings came down some way other than by those aircraft that hit them, but I think we better keep our eyes open and listen to people like Alex Jones, who has a different idea. A lot of people said that intelligence was bad. The reason Bush and the administration didn't stop 9/11 from happening. They knew it was going to happen. They knew at least by August 6th, 5 weeks ahead of time, if not later.
Well, there's information that just came out recently that on July 10th, George Tenet and Cooper Black had an emergency meeting with Condoleezza Rice explaining that had to do with an imminent attack on U.S. targets, possibly within the United States.
We wouldn't say what George Bush knew, because that doesn't mean anything. He's so dumb it doesn't make any difference. The other people like Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz in there, and of course Condoleezza Rice. They have some intelligence and they knew what was going on. So they also served time in prison for crimes against humanity.
Well, if you put 9/11 aside, all of the crimes that have taken place since are completely treasonous. They've killed upwards of 655,000 Iraqis since the invasion.
I think that's a good number.
Well, supposedly it was the John...
the way they do every other thing, medical journal, and Bush was still pushing for 30, so you knew it was a lot more than 30,000.
Well, even if it was 30,000 deaths are too many for lies.
Certainly. Two is serial murder. And how about when you got 200,000?
Right.
He's a champion serial murderer.
Is there anything you'd like to say? Do you think the government...
Certainly is. There's no doubt in my mind there's information that we don't know about yet. The reason I believe this is it took the survivors' spouses months fighting against the Bush administration to even have an investigation on the 9/11
The very fact that
disaster.
they did not want to investigate this speaks volumes in and of itself.
Right. They had to fight tooth and nail before the Bush administration finally conceded to have one, which is unprecedented. I mean, after Pearl Harbor,
6
there was
days.
no question. It happened exactly 6 days later. You just don't have an attack on that scale without some type of what happened, what did we do wrong, why did our intelligence fail us? Something had to be investigated, or something was wrong with that. They didn't want this investigation.
Sally Regenhart lost her son, a fireman, I believe, on the day of 9/11, and she said the largest loss of life in American history, and not one person wanted to know how and why this happened.
Exactly. Well, a lot of people did, but a lot of people in the administration.
Well, the people outside of the government certainly wanted to know what happened.
First, I'd like to introduce Rory O'Connor. He's a documentary filmmaker and journalist. He's also president and co-founder of the international media firm Global Vision Inc. and the Global Center, an affiliated nonprofit educational foundation. He has directed, written, and/or produced numerous films and television programs, and served as an executive in charge of 3 weekly television series, South Africa Now and Rights and Wrongs, Human Rights Television on PBS, and Children First on ABC. His broadcast and film work has been honored with the George Polk Award, a Writers Guild Award, 2 Emmys, an Iris, a Cine Gold Eagle, and many other awards. O'Connor's most recent films examine the effects of globalization and of poverty around the world, economic reforms, and human rights in China, and the origins of ethnic cleansing in Yugoslavia. He also oversees 2 internet sites, the not-for-profit media channel Org and the Global Vision News Network, gvnews.net, an international wire service distributing thousands of articles daily from hundreds of professional news organizations around the world. It's my pleasure to present Rory O'Connor.
Thank you all for coming today, and it's really my pleasure to be here in New Jersey, the fabulous state of the Jersey girls. True heroes of 9/11. Of course, New Jersey is also the home of Governor Kane, so I guess not all is well here in terms of 9/11 in New Jersey, but really pleased and proud to be here. I'm going to keep my remarks short because we do have some other speakers, and also I want to get into a dialogue with the audience here. But I think that what I want to focus on, there's a lot in the film that you just saw, and a lot of areas and avenues that deserve further attention and focus. But one of the things that I've been focusing on, even before we made the film and subsequent to that, is looking at what they call in Washington the pre-attack threat assessments, and what we call in New Jersey the warnings that came before the attacks. There were literally hundreds of them. The NSA, our own security agency, issued dozens of them alone, and as you saw in the film, more than 14 other countries issued these warnings. Now, but there continue to be, the Jersey girls put it pretty simply in the film. We had questions and we wanted answers. Well, 5 years after the worst terror attacks in the history of the United States, we have more questions than ever. And we have fewer answers, perhaps, than ever. Some of the questions that have arisen since we finished the film in a short period of time, some of them come from Governor Kane and Representative Hamilton's own book, Without Precedent, wherein they revealed that they came this close to asking the Department of Justice to open a criminal investigation of the Department of Defense for its lack of cooperation with the 9/11 Commission around the issue of NORAD and what the heck our $300 billion that we spend on defense every year is buying us if it doesn't buy us airplanes that can go up when we're under attack and do something about it. Also in their book, Governor Kane and Representative Hamilton announced that they felt in retrospect that they had let Mayor Rudy Giuliani off the hook, that they had treated him with too much respect and hadn't asked tough enough questions about the emergency preparedness in New York City because they were afraid of the public halo that Mayor Giuliani had around him as the saint of 9/11. In addition, subsequent to their book coming out, I reported, along with my colleague Scott Malone, that Judith Miller of the New York Times had been given in July of 2001 classified NSA documents from a still anonymous White House source, where have we heard that before, warning of impending attacks by Al-Qaeda on the continental United States. Why was Ms. Miller given this classified information warning of these attacks? because the person who leaked it to her couldn't get the attention of the President of the United States 2 months before the attacks. And so it was thought that if it was leaked in the New York Times and printed in the New York Times, maybe the President would read it there and then he would pay attention. I guess it makes sense in a certain curious manner. The only fly in the ointment is that Ms. Miller never printed the story. She later said on 9/11, looking up, because she lived about a block away from the attacks, that might have been the worst mistake that she ever made in her journalistic career. And of course, subsequent to that, when Bob Woodward's latest book came out, we found out that precisely the same time, in July of 2001, the CIA head, George Tenet, raced over for an unannounced, unscheduled meeting with Condoleezza Rice. He was so afraid of an impending United States attack by Al-Qaeda that he just dropped everything and rode over to have an emergency meeting with Ms. Rice. Ms. Rice, of course, didn't remember the meeting initially. Initially, she said it hadn't taken place. Then she said, well, maybe it did, but she didn't remember it. And certainly it didn't seem like it was a big deal. It didn't seem like a big deal to the 9/11 Commission either, because they initially said that they had never heard of the meeting. Of course, it later turned out that they had heard of the meeting, but they thought that that had little significance. Just like they thought that the revelations, as you saw in the film, that it's quite likely that $100,000 went from Pakistan intelligence agency directly to Muhammad Atta to help pay for the attacks, was also of little significance. So they had questions and they wanted answers. We have questions, we want answers. And I'm going to conclude again by quoting one of the Jersey girls. They felt that the United States was threatened by terrorists, by incompetence, and maybe by something else. So that's what we need to know, and that's why we need to continue to press for truth about 9/11. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory. Kyle Hentz is Executive Director of 9/11 Citizens Watch. He also is Press for Truth Executive Producer, co-producer, co-writer. 9/11 Citizens Watch is the only organization solely dedicated to monitoring the government investigations into the events of September 11th and their aftermath. He has appeared on C-SPAN, CNN, Al Jazeera, and has done countless radio interviews on the subject of 9/11. He served as a spokesperson and advocate for the Justice of 9/11 complaint and petition presented to New York Attorney General Eliot Spitzer in 2004. Up until September 10, 2001, Kyle's main interest was sailing. He holds a captain's license and has sailed throughout the world and across the oceans. Kyle's lived in Newport for the past 16 years. On September 11, 2001, his interest and energies changed completely, and the ensuing years have been devoted entirely to reading and investigating what happened that day. He has been interviewed all over the world because of his accumulated knowledge and investigations. This month, the documentary 9/11 Press for Truth was finally completed and is being screened in this country and Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Kyle Hentz.
I'd like to start by saying that when I began on this path, I think it's fair to say that I didn't have a political bone in my body. I was not an activist either. I'm a lifelong independent. And I came to this as a sailor, a photographer, sort of a jack of many trades. And there were questions at first about the notion of whether or not we as Americans should give up the liberties that we are guaranteed by our Creator in order to have this illusion of security, leaving it up to our government to decide what we should give up, how much, and the point being that it's an illusion that we can have any kind of security, especially when we turn this over to a government that has not been accountable to the people in this country for a very long time. And so I came to this without a political bone in my body. But when I started to see the material that I came across on the internet after 9/11, at the time I wasn't working, one question led to another, and I kept digging and digging and digging. And eventually I decided, I remember thinking, why isn't anyone talking about this? You know, the planes are flying around the skies for an hour and a half, or 2 hours, and planes aren't scrambled. You know, that was the big thing that got my attention at first, and yet no one was talking about it. No one in the media. The stories weren't coming out. We would wait weeks for a story. Eventually, there were a series of stories that came out because of leaks. So someone on the inside leaked something. This was in middle of 2002. So you had Colleen Rowley, who was working for she was a field agent in the FBI in Minneapolis. And she wrote this long memo to the director of the FBI, Mueller, about her efforts to get inside the computer of Zacarias Moussaoui, who's the only alleged co-conspirator who was brought, to justice or brought to court for involvement in 9/11. She tried to raise the alarm, she tried to get access, and her efforts were undermined from within, from the inside. And then we heard about Kenneth Williams in Phoenix, where he raised the alarm. Probably should have raised the alarm quite a bit sooner. He was forced, his hand was forced, and he raised the alarm about Arabs training to fly in small planes at different flight schools, and this one in particular in Phoenix. So there was a mosque, some members of the mosque were getting flight training at a small school there. So he suggested to headquarters back home, hey, maybe we should canvass all the flight schools in this country to see if there are others and what they're up to. That never happened. Okay. So again, it sort of got blocked. It went to Washington, but then somehow there's a choke point or something, and this thing didn't go any further. And then, of course, the August memo, which was featured in the film. And when that was released, then all of a sudden we had national attention. And it was at that point. Now, I tell this story just because, again, I came to this very naive. Sure I had some questions, sure I suspected foul play on the part of this government, over the years and decades of my own independent readings, but I had no idea how deep it went and to what extent our constitutional republic is threatened and how much it's been undermined, particularly since 9/11. I had no idea, but I decided at that point that we should bring together people in Washington who had some knowledge about this subject and see if we could get some attention paid to it. And so I say this just because I was one person with no experience, with just some curiosity, with the willingness, and fortunately time. Time is precious, and I had some time on my hands. So I read and I read and I read. And I ended up contacting some others who were doing similar work, same questions they had, and we said, let's have a press conference. And that was the launch of unansweredquestions.org. C-SPAN was very interested at first. In the end, they didn't cover our event. But we did bring together some people, and slowly, more and more people came on board and started to echo the questions we were raising. And the family started raising the questions. And we started echoing the questions they were raising, because they were doing their homework, as you saw in the film. And now we're at a point in this country where a majority of us suspect a cover-up by the federal government as to what happened. Okay, a majority. And I would say a third to a half, 35–40% suspect government complicity. We need to know, because on the backs of 9/11, the world's been turned upside down. Escalation of violence is occurring all over the world. Wars are being fought. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying as a result. And the concentration of power is extreme and very dangerous, not only to our republic and the Constitution, but to people around the world, and to any notion that we can have hope for freedom, for not only for ourselves, but for others. So it's on the backs of 9/11, and I believe a lie about 9/11, a deception about what happened, that all of this has happened. And my hope is that the card of fear, that the politics of fear are beginning to run its course, and that we will see a change. There are other people that have also led courageous efforts to bring about change and accountability in the area of voting. Bev Harris, featured on Hacking Democracy. Brad Freeman carrying the same torch. And others have picked up that, because if we don't have the ballot box, then we have nothing. And we have an election on Tuesday, and it's really, I mean, I'm very nervous about it. But again, there is a case where just a handful of people have propelled an issue that would have otherwise been buried, ignored by the mainstream media, just as 9/11 issues have taken it and pushed it forward. Just a grandmother, just curious, ended up dumpster diving and pulling up documents and doing searches on the internet and finding code to machines that we're not even allowed to have access to. Our own votes, the core of our democratic system is privatized, just like the military. So my point is that we all have to take responsibility. And because right now we have an unaccountable government that is shredding the Constitution and is threatening the very foundation of our life and our future. And so my hope is that we can move forward together, that we can lobby a Congress. I don't have much hope if it's a Republican Congress that convenes in January, but perhaps for an investigation. If we don't get one in our own Congress, then we should proceed with some kind of international tribunal, and we should educate the world, which in many cases are more educated than we Americans, about what happened on 9/11, and we should get to the bottom of it and understand the ties that state apparatus have with terrorism through the ages, and perhaps on 9/11. And that's something perhaps we can talk about further. So my hope is that each of you will look to ways that you can engage with this movement to find the truth, to lobby for an investigation, to buy a film, to do a screening at your own home, and join us. And in the hope, and hopefully by working together, we can get results and get to the bottom of 9/11 and turn the world right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Last but not least, our final presenter is Phil Berg, who has been very active in the community. He was a candidate for U.S. Senate in 2000, Governor of Pennsylvania in 1990 and 1996, and Lieutenant Governor in 1994. He's been a state committee person 8 years and committee person for 31 years. He's a former Deputy Attorney General of Pennsylvania for 8 years. Phil practices at a very busy law office in beautiful Lafayette Hill, Pennsylvania. He's been a fighter for individual rights for many years and is proud that he often donates time as a pro bono attorney on many occasions. Phil has handled a number of significant cases throughout his legal career. He was highly involved in challenging the 2000 presidential election, spending 3 intense weeks in Florida investigating voting irregularities. You all remember that, don't we? He had formally demanded the voluntary disbarment of 3 Supreme Court justices due to their conflict of interest in that decision. He was in the process of filing formal legal complaints when September 11th happened and ended that effort, began a new effort. He was the attorney to Ellen Mariani, who was the wife of Louis Neil Mariani, who died when United Airlines Flight 175 was flown into the South Tower of the World Trade Center on September 11th. Also, William Rodriguez. Willie Rodriguez is a former maintenance worker at the World Trade Center who aided in the evacuation of hundreds of people who would otherwise have perished that day. I'd like to welcome Phil Bird. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Several days after the tragedy, rather murder of 3,000 people, including people from 99 countries with the complicity of the United States federal government on September 11, 2001. Another aspect of that tragedy was dealt to thousands of people. The Environmental Protection Agency Secretary, Christy Todd Whitman, came to New York and told the people of New York, residents and volunteers alike, good news, the air is safe to breathe. How dare she? Whitman's statements, along with safeguards that were not put in place, means there's absolute liability in the United States federal government. And a decision just came down last week where a federal judge refused to throw out a number of lawsuits of people who are injured and have died at ground zero. So there's hope out there. Bush and his cronies either made 9/11 happen or let it happen. And if they let it happen, then they made it happen. Either way, they're responsible, and more important, they've completely and unequivocally covered it up. And remember, Nixon went down on cover-up alone. September 11th was a day that changed the course of history. It was an environmental disaster of epic proportions and a tragedy that is the most significant event of our lifetimes. When the World Trade Centers fell, material showered down on New York, causing unthinkable health problems, which they said, nothing's wrong here. And they're still fighting. The people that were injured, even policemen and firemen who were injured there, they're still being said it has nothing to do with the events of 9/11. My former client and a hero, and I'll explain that later, Willie Rodriguez, suffers today from the permanent health injuries he sustained, as does Rachel Hughes, who I traveled throughout Europe with trying to set up a 9/11 international commission. Willie is a hero because he helped save hundreds of people, and he had the master key for the World Trade Center North Tower. And very significant, Willie heard explosions in the North Tower before it fell and before the first plane hit. That is so significant. He testified to that before the 9/11 Commission. There's not a word of it in the 9/11 Commission report. Willie went up the fire tower stairs with firemen to open fire doors. Think about it, fire doors open out. Willie was an employee at the North Tower and he had the master key and he opened the doors. Willie is lucky, and so are we, that he survived. He was the last person out of the North Tower to survive by diving under a fire truck and being pulled to safety. Rachel Hughes, who I said I traveled with, she is speaking out for thousands of others who were lied to by the Bush administration, and today, over 5 years later, still suffers, and she's personally in debt for over $30,000 because she has no health care, and the U.S. government has not and will not provide her with health care. We should all applaud Rachel Hughes and Willie for their efforts in continuing this effort. The lies, yes, lies of the Bush administration are such that they must be held responsible, as they committed crime. Bush and his cronies belong in jail for treason and murder. For the past 5 years, I always ask people, do you believe we were told the truth of 9/11 by the U.S. government? And 90% have said no, and now the polls are finally catching up and agreeing with me. I will address you about the critical issues, rather the critical crimes of our time, the events and cover-up of 9/11, the taking away of rights since 9/11, and the illegal war in Iraq. Together we will find the truth of September 11th. To do that, I think we must have an international truth commission and proceed with my lawsuit. It is our firm belief that the RICO lawsuit that I filed, and will be filing again, because I had to withdraw it with Mr. Rodriguez decided to pull out for some personal reasons, is one of the most significant cases in our history. RICO is a racketeering statute, Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organization Act. It was created in the 1960s by the United States Congress to go after the mafia, or the mob. It's our position there's a mob in the White House, and together with you, we're going to get them. And stated that Congress created RICO. Yes, Congress, that today, Democrats, Republicans, a few independents, they're violating their oath of office by not holding impeachment proceedings right now against George W. Bush and Dick Cheney for their lies about 9/11 and the weapons of mass destruction that got us into the illegal war against Iraq. In my RICO lawsuit against Bush and his cronies, I'm alleging, because you need before, during, and after, I'm alleging foreknowledge, failure to warn, failure to prevent, and cover-up. David Ray Griffin said that 9/11 Commission report is a lie and cannot be believed, and that high government officials were complicit. Griffin also said to me that the RICO lawsuit that I filed is the vehicle to reveal the falsity of the September 11th Commission report. And there are other lawsuits dealing with environmental issues. Not part of my lawsuit because we need certain crimes like murder for RICO. Although I'm thinking about incorporating the health problems at ground zero since deaths have now occurred. And I believe they were foreseeable by the mob. We believe that George W. Bush will be invoking a long-standing procedure of invoking national security, executive privilege, and sovereign immunity to suppress the basis of the truth. And I promise I'll do everything in my power to fight these attempts to block the truth, as one cannot hide when we're dealing with the murder of 3,000 people. We must reach out to anti-war groups and stress to them, and I've been arguing this for years, we must stress that if there was no 9/11, there would be no wars today. We must unite against this administration. If divided as we have been, Bush continues to win, even though hopefully in the polls next week we'll give him a real big blow. Congress spent $65 million investigating Clinton, and only $15 million with a deadline to investigate the murder of 3,000 people. To date, the Bush administration has done more to diminish individual rights than any other administration in our history. With the enactment of the following, the Bush administration has taken away rights. The Stabilization Act, that was passed right after September 11th, made it so individuals injured or for family members who died from the terrorists could receive money for only the first time in history from the U.S. Treasury on the condition that they would not sue the airlines, the Port Authority, or the U.S. government. Ellen Mariani called that, and I still do today, hush money. The Patriot Act won, the taking away of rights, an attack on the Bill of Rights, the foundation of principles that people around the world wanted to follow. Today, the government of the United States could take me away, claiming that I'm a subversive, attacking the federal government, put me in prison, and not allow me to speak to an attorney. As outrageous as it is, that's the law today. We know that days prior to September 11th, there were a large number of put options. Stock market wages, the stocks of American Airlines, United Airlines, and other companies impacted by the attacks would go down. You can invest in securities markets and make the source difficult to trace, but there's always a paper trail, not like the voting machine. Find the investor, find someone who knew 9/11 would happen in advance. The fact that they have not identified a single person regarding the put options is proof of a cover-up. However, Bush and his cronies are illegally following the money trails of money transactions now coming into this country. That's unbelievable. Within 48 hours after the attacks, the FBI had photos and names of 19 Arabs. 5 years later, no investors have been identified. Also, the seismic records showing 2+ earthquakes immediately preceding each collapse of each building in the World Trade Center. And must we know that fighter jets were called out 67 times in the year prior to 9/11 when planes were off course. Where were the fighter jets on September 11th? And many of you remember Payne Stewart in 1999 when his plane was off course for several minutes. The FAA was notified, fighter jets came out. And important and significant is they said if that plane, as they looked in, there was no light on the plane, they said if that plane was going to crash in a populated area, they would have shot it down. And correlate what happened on 9/11. It's difficult for people to believe that any government would do anything against them, and that's the biggest problem in this country. However, what we have to do is we have to tell people, remember what happened, and most don't. Operation Northwoods, 1962, a document now declassified because it's 40 years later. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, that's the head of each branch of the service, the Army, Navy, Marines, all the branches. Our government had plans to destroy American property, injure and kill American citizens, and blame it on Cuba to go to war with Cuba. It also, in that document, it called for using fake aircraft and fake passengers, because we get into that issue of what really crashed at the Pentagon. Thankfully, President John F. Kennedy said no. Switch the word Iraq for Cuba, and we have the war with Iraq. That document, Operation Northwoods, it's on my website, and I'll give you my card later. That is the blueprint of what happened on 9/11. We have other lies and cover-ups. The World Trade Center, the pancake theory. It can't be possible because they neglect to tell you, and I'm not sure it's a movie that came in late, so I'm not sure everything, some things I might be saying. There are 47 steel columns in each one of the towers going from bedrock to the top. If the building pancaked, like they said, it would pancake around those center columns. It didn't. Everything was pulverized. The evidence is gone. All the steel was shipped to China. That's destruction of evidence. That's a crime. What happened after? Once they couldn't find any more living survivors, they should have sealed the area off to examine what happened. They didn't. They cleared that site as fast they could. And now, unfortunately, 5 years later, we see they didn't. We're still finding remnants, and it's a real shame for the families. The Pentagon, so many unanswered questions, so many crimes. Rumsfeld mentioned a missile hitting the Pentagon. And you have to mention it one time, that was never brought up again. But it's there in the record. How about Attorney General Ashcroft not to fly commercial aircraft after July 2001, only military charges? How about Mayor Willie Brown from San Francisco and others told not to fly on 9/11? How about President Bush? I hate to call him that. No special Secret Service on 9/11. Do you know that the Secret Service violated the law that day? The law provides that in the event of an attempted assassination or attack on our government, the Secret Service is immediately to take the President, Vice President, head of the House, head of the Senate, and whoever is in the succession order to a secret location. They allowed him to stay in Florida. A policeman, I have hearsay on this one, a policeman said to the Secret Service agent, when the news came in about the second plane, I guess we're out of here. And he said no. That means there was also a stand-down order in Florida. They knew they were not going to attack Florida. It's there. We just have to put the pieces together. And how about the flight by the Saudis on 9/13 when they went around the country picking up all the families, no one else could fly? I could go on and on and on. How about the failure of the District Attorney Morgenthau from New York and Attorney General Elliot Spitzer? What a disgrace that they didn't call for grand jury investigations. And as you heard here, Kyle presented something to the Attorney General.
Justice for 9/11 complaint petition.
To say, do something. Nothing. What a disgrace. Or are they accomplices? Are they in on it? Because did you know that Elliot Spitzer, I just recently found out, he joined in a brief helping Silverstein to get money from the effects of 9/11? What a disgrace. Silverstein is the person who bought the complex 90 days before and happened to insure it for a case of terrorist attacks and made billions on it. The truth, and we will find out the truth, is that our government, Bush's cronies, were guilty of far more than negligence. Two huge mistakes by proponents of the official story, I think, can be quoted to devastating effect. One is an interview of Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, I didn't bring it with me today, but I have it, by Peter Jennings, the late Peter Jennings. In that interview, Mayor Giuliani described how he had been in a special command center, but not at the World Trade Center 7. Now, how come he wasn't in 7? 7 was across the street. Fires didn't start till later in that building. I don't even know how they started there. After the planes were struck, but prior to the South Tower collapsing, that's the first building to come down, an emergency worker told him to evacuate because the World Trade Center towers were going to collapse before they collapsed. This is a huge admission and evidence of crimes. No steel and reinforced concrete skyscraper ever collapsed before or since due to fire. This warning to Giuliani was in no uncertain terms. He said he was told there would be a collapse, so he evacuated. This tells us two things. One, some emergency personnel had foreknowledge of a historically unprecedented occurrence, a steel scraper collapsing due to fire. That is virtually sure proof of controlled demolition. And in February 2005 in Madrid, Spain, a building burned for 24 hours. I don't know if you saw the news. It was gutted, but it did not fall. It was only 50 stories, but it did not come down. The second thing, and this deflates, in my opinion, Giuliani as a hero, and shows the cynicism and brutality of his answers. Giuliani was warned. Giuliani got his ass out of there, but the police and firefighters were not warned, which is to say they were slaughtered. As singer Bruce Springsteen put it, love and duty called to the firefighters, and greed and murder called to the traitors that killed him. We together, all of us, must be focused upon the issues of our time to come together, hand in hand, for a peaceful revolution, to end the cover-up, to regain our rights, and to end the war in Iraq. We must all hang together, or we'll all hang separately. It's the only way to overthrow an entrenched dictatorship. As I said earlier, they either made it happen or let it happen. And if they let it happen, then they made it happen. Either way, they're responsible, and more important, they've completely and unequivocally covered it up. And hopefully we can establish an international September 11th Truth Commission. My lawsuit I will be filing again very soon with, right now I'm talking to a New York City policeman who had all kinds of health problems from that. But I will be filing a recused lawsuit again. And with all of your help, and what you can do it on the internet, we together will find the truth of 9/11. Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask is if I pass this around, our speakers, some of them have traveled great distances at their own expense and have done a lot to help us to put this program together. And so if anybody would wish to donate, I'm going to pass it around, and please give generously if you can. And I turn it over to Kyle.
Yeah, we'll have a panel discussion now that I've offered to moderate. But before we begin that discussion, if any of you have questions, we'll do a Q&A with all of you after the discussion here. We may involve you in the discussion, but if any of you have questions that you wrote out down during the film, perhaps you write it down on the paper.
My question just about what you're going to do, because we've gone far afield from what the movie showed.
Yes, we have,
Yeah.
certainly, so there's lots to talk about.
Are you keeping your panel discussion on what they showed?
No, we'll discuss anything.
Because talking about a missile hitting the Pentagon had nothing to do with that.
That's
but
correct.
It did bring up, like, Osama bin Laden being allowed to leave. So
Yes.
okay.
But I
Whatever you want to
to
talk about, I'd be happy.
Okay.
But I thought maybe you wanted to have it strictly track with this movie today.
Well, we'll talk about why that's important and some of the issues that revolve around that question and the approach to the subject matter. But I wanted to introduce John Gold.
We have 25 minutes.
We have 25 minutes?
At most. They're going to close.
Well, why don't we just go straight into Q&A, but I wanted to introduce John Gold, sitting to my far right. John was instrumental in helping getting the film made. He's also an active blogger and is very engaged on this issue and very well informed. He's done a lot of his own homework on the issue and will contribute to the discussion. So let's just go straight into your questions, and we'll see if we can answer most of them before we have to go. Ma'am?
Yeah, look at this room. The hands of people. You're claiming that the majority of people in the United States now believe that there's a cover-up over 9/11?
Yes.
Look at the contents of this room. There's no majority. What can anybody do? If I went out and I've tried this, going out and talking to people, they think I'm nuts.
Well, I'll tell you what you
And
can
I
do.
don't believe that the majority of people in this country have the intelligence to even surmise that there was something behind 9/11.
Well,
I don't think it's going to go anywhere. If you've got an answer, I would.
I hope you're wrong. I would say that you are wrong relative to what the polls are showing. I mean, there have been multiple polls done by very credible agencies, and including Zogby, including Scripps Howard, which have confirmed exactly what I'm telling you.
How
And
did Bush get elected twice?
Stolen.
All right, there you have
Well,
it.
he got
What's
elected
the
once.
answer? What's the
and
answer? We
selected.
can't even count on our vote anymore.
One thing that we would ask you to do, look, we need your help. You saw in the film the crucial role of the media and how the mainstream media has basically, as we all have seen over the last 6 years, repeatedly dropped the ball, not only in relation to 9/11, but lots of other things. So we made a film. Now, this film has not appeared on television in the United States. But what can you do? There's very specific things you can do. We have had a series of house parties all across the country, just before 9/11 and at least after 9/11. And everybody in this room could take a DVD and invite 10 people to come over to your house and say, watch this film. And then everyone who comes to your house can get it. Anybody who will have a house party, we will give a free DVD to. Invite 10 of your neighbors over. If they'll have a house party, we'll give each 10 of them a free DVD. And so we have to use people power. You know, we don't have a large, in fact, we have a zero advertising and promotion budget. But we have screenings like this constantly in about 48 states now. We haven't hit Alaska or Hawaii yet, but we hope to. So if you're looking for something to do, there's a very specific thing that you and your neighbors can do to help spread the word, and we need your help.
There's another thing that's going on right now, and I won't try to monopolize. That even if I'm carrying around a petition to impeach this cabal, this evil cabal. People won't sign it because they're afraid. They know what this government is capable of, snatching you right out of this room and hiding you away in Gitmo and doing whatever they want to you. They're afraid. So how do you combat both these things? Either the lack of interest and when the fear.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
There's safety in numbers. Kristen Brownweiser, one of the Jersey girls that was in the movie, she recently wrote that the original family steering committee is made up of 12 individuals, and they managed to turn Washington, D.C. upside down to create a so-called independent 9/11 commission. It didn't work, but imagine what 24 people could do. Imagine what 48 people could do. If we can stick together, then we have more traction to get things done.
And one thing, and I don't take time. We have a tool. We wouldn't be here today, in my opinion, if we didn't have the internet. The internet is such a fabulous thing. If you could go home and if you don't know how to use it, some relative, somebody does, and spread the message to everyone on your address file. Everyone must have at least 10, 20, 50, 100 people. And it costs nothing. You send a message out and direct them to the site where this movie is. That's how you can do it. And the other thing is, as scary as it is, because people they are afraid, but try to go back, look up Operation Northwoods. It's really the blueprint of what happened. It's our government, and it's a document created by our government, and they were going to do it. They were going to injure and kill our own people to go to war with Cuba. And if you can show that document, which is now declassified, it's the blueprint of this. It's scary, but that's
I'd like to address the issue that they wouldn't do it. These individuals who are in power now, Phil talked about the environmental disaster. Condoleezza Rice's office was actually the office that authorized the press release that Christy Todd Whitman spoke about on, I believe it was September 13th or September 18th, telling the New Yorkers that the air was safe to breathe and the water was safe to drink. As a result, now 70,000 individuals are sick. The Iraq War, according to the latest Lancet study, Johns Hopkins University, sponsored by MIT, upwards of 655,000 Iraqi civilians have been killed as a result of our invasion. So to say that these individuals would not be willing to kill upwards 3,000 people, 2,973, is almost absurd at this point.
Right. Assuming that the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives next week, and from what I've seen with Representative Pelosi and Representative John Conyers, they seem very adamant about an investigation of the administration. Do they have enough power to actually make something happen quickly? Can someone answer
Well,
that?
if Pelosi is saying do not impeach. Pelosi is saying do not impeach.
Pelosi is saying
Shameful.
The power that they will have, and please everybody, don't catch your chickens before they're hatched, and make sure you vote on Tuesday. But should that happen, they have subpoena power, which is very important. They will have the power in the House of Representatives, for example, to conduct investigations and to subpoena documents and to subpoena witnesses to try to get to the bottom of what's happened over the last 6 years. But we are also calling, along with the families, for a reopened investigation. Look, one reason that there's all these conspiracy theories right now, and honestly, I have to tell you that even the people who made the film, there was a lot of disagreement. There were people working on the film who thought that they made it happen. There were others who thought that it let it happen. There were those of us, such as myself, who has 30 years of looking at these guys who thinks, incompetence is just as good an explanation, frankly, because they've been incompetent in everything else that they've tried to do over the last 6 years, from prosecuting the war to Katrina So it's certainly conceivable to me that it's just a sheer level of incompetence led them to ignore all the warnings. But regardless, we have to put all that aside because there's an absence of knowledge right now, and there's a vacuum. And so what's rushing into that vacuum are theories. Some of them are highly conspiratorial, some of them are not. We need a new investigation. The 9/11 Commission is simply the Warren Commission of the 21st century.
I'd like to address the incompetence. I don't mean to disagree with Rory, but the individuals in office now, prior to getting into office, they wanted to go to war with Iraq, they wanted to go to war with Afghanistan. They managed to do both. They managed to steal 2 elections. They managed to steal, they managed to make billions of dollars for their corporate friends. These people are not incompetent in my eyes.
I just want to answer directly your question very briefly before we move to another question. So far, we've handed about 35 DVDs to members of Congress. So my first round, when I went down to DC to do the premiere there at the Landmark Theater downtown, was to go with a handful of volunteers to people who I thought were most likely to be open to sponsor legislation reopening the investigation, or perhaps less out on a limb to sponsor a screening on Capitol Hill to get the conversation going. So I went to, and these are people you can call and say, I support you. If you're going to do this, I will support you. I'm asking you, I'm calling upon you to support the screening of this film on Capitol Hill and to support legislation reopening the investigation. And we can't let Pelosi get up there and champion the recommendations of this damn commission without first getting to the bottom of what really happened and answering all the questions that the family members raised. So you can call these people. These are the people that whose staff I have already spoken with, and who in some cases I've met personally. In the case of Dennis Kucinich, I've met him on a number of occasions. I've given him the new Pearl Harbor by David Ray Griffin. I've given him materials in the past. And I've met with his staffers. And I would say, these are the people. Dennis Kucinich, okay? Remember, the leaders of the Progressive Caucus. You can look that up online. Lobby the Progressive Caucus. Get them to sponsor the screening. The whole caucus. The 9/11 caucus, which presumably was set up really to push the recommendations. They were never interested in digging into the questions that were not answered. So that's Representative Shays. Some question of whether to be reelected. That's Congresswoman Maloney from New York. So lobby Maloney. Okay, she's got a lot of family members in her district. Lobby Maloney. Say Rory and Mindy, they did their homework. 70% of their questions not answered. Is that okay with you? You know, get them to sponsor. There are others. So, you know, lobby your members. Get them to, Conyers, I went to Conyers' office. I met with his chief of staff. He looked at me. I showed him the film. He says, you're not one of those guys who believe the government happened. I said, well, this film does not take that position. So he was upfront with me. He said, we don't believe that here. So this is what we're dealing with. I suspect some kind of insider complicity. I don't think 9/11 could have been pulled off without it.
Dennis Kucinich is the only congressman you can mention as being good.
Ron Paul is on the Republican side I've gone to. You know, there are others. But
Yes, sir.
What I'm interested most in is what the actual political implications of trying to do and following through on what you're doing. If the Kennedy administration, in '62, considered this and rejected it, and that's 15 or so years after the creation of the CIA and Defense Department, you have the vastest apparatus of the national security state. How far are we going to have to go? What's a reasonable outcome? You said we want a quiet, peaceful revolution. Those are very unlikely combinations of ideas. Revolutions don't tend to be quiet and peaceful. That's the kind of revolution we're talking about, which it seems to me would be what this is about. I think we have a conservative or reactionary revolution going on now. So just to simply halt and reverse that is a kind of revolution. But your original comment that you were apolitical most of your life, I would think is true of most Americans. And I've been the reverse since in and out, not active in parties, but active following the country's history. And there are a lot of apolitical people who get involved for a very short time. They cannot sustain misery. How are you going to sustain a movement on this? And where is it likely, in your judgment, I mean, you're going to differ, but where this is going to go? Because including George Bush is all well and good, but I don't think that's enough. So where are we prepared? Where do you envision it going?
Well, I agree with you that what's actually needed is a counter-revolution. So maybe we could start with that. And look, fortunately, President Bush did not suspend the elections on national security grounds and declare martial law, which frankly, I think if he decided to do that in 2003 or 4, he might well have gotten away with it, but he didn't. Maybe that was a crucial mistake. We still have the ability in this country to vote against. There may not be anybody that you like to vote for, but we certainly have the ability against. I think it starts in the ballot box and it starts on Tuesday.
No, we don't even have the Supreme Court upholding an election. So I don't think voting is the way to go.
I don't want to put a wet blanket on any. Look at the immigration movement.
I'm happy people are paying attention.
The illegal immigration movement managed to get millions of people to stand on the lawn in Washington, D.C. and across the country, and they managed to get legislation for them. Why can't we do that? Why can't we manage to do that? Isn't this issue important enough?
I just think that it's important to understand how far, and to know how far we have come since the days and weeks and months right after 9/11, and how much fear there was in the country then, and how little dissent, and how much there is now. I agree with you. I don't have much faith in this election system anymore, in the voting systems, and in the dirty tricks that we know both sides play. Unfortunately, the Republicans, since they control the voting machines, have more opportunities for foul play. I agree, but what do we do about it? We have to push through the fear and hang on to hope and take responsibility in whatever small ways we can. And a lot of times that's just in your own backyard, in your own neighborhood. It's voting with your dollar every day, because most of us still bank with Bank of America or with Chase or whatever, which supports the status quo industrial war-making machine. So we have to unplug from that. It's an economic choice. It's an economic vote that we make every day. That's something very practical you can do.
Can I say something just as a follow-up? When the 9/11 happened, I predicted to friends of mine, not every detail was going to go on. It reminded me of what my experience as a child with McCarthy, a period of fear in the 50s. And I said, this is it. Whether it's, however it came about, that was long before any speculation as to how it came about in the investigation. This is a great opportunity for government to do all sorts of things and just keep people afraid. Because I've long understood that fear was a very powerful motivator in people's lives, and the government preyed on it and manipulated people with fear.
Yeah. Well, they're ruling by fear and propaganda.
The point of that is, unless you think through where you're going in advance, where it's likely to take you, and what your responses are going to be in advance, systematically, you're going to get undercut at some point down the road because you have a very life. But they have done a very good job of connecting a lot of somebody else a chance.
Sir, Mayor.
Thank you. I have a question, a legal question, and that now said an invitation is I attend Temple University. I happen to be in agreement with the argument for governmental complicity, if not perpetration. And I just learned, I'm very happy to found out my suspicions early on, but through the internet, I found other Temple students that are organizing, and we actually, I wasn't there, I missed it, but students actually put together the first public demonstration about 9/11 truth, and it just happened Friday. So there'll be more. Some other students here can tell you about it.
We have a screening in Temple. What do you say?
We just went out yesterday on campus out near the bell tower. The majority of the student body, about 30,000 people, passed by there. We handed out over 500 flyers. We only had about 4 of us out there doing so, but we're building up support in doing that and just getting the initial basis.
That's what we need. Thank you.
I have one legal question, which I'm curious. Let's say if the inertia takes a while and my belief is the truth will out, that eventually if the case is made with the administration, and I'm curious what would happen by that point, the administration's out of office, how would it affect the legal case of who was prosecuted or what?
No, it's this statute, you can still go after the people who did this. As far as I'm concerned, they murdered these people, and therefore they should be held responsible. And I even have a press release ready, it just hasn't time to put out. We really need like the deep throat of 9/11. We need someone, and someone there will happen. And if we can get into discovery in the court cases, which we haven't yet, because there's been all kinds of procedural, the minute we would get discovery, you'll see blue people fall like fireflies because they'll try to bail out on this thing. But contact me. I'm a Temple graduate. I'll be glad to help you guys
out. For the attorney, your client, the woman whose husband was killed on the airplane.
Yes.
Is she certain that he was in that plane and that he was killed there, or?
Well, she's as certain as anyone could be. I mean, okay. You get into the other question here about, and Operation Northwoods talks about switching people, switching of planes. She's pretty sure that he was on that plane at the last time I spoke to her on that. She withdrew from the case. It's very hard to tell these people that your loved one wasn't on that plane, where'd they go. But there's a real question in my mind of what really hit the Pentagon, which gets another whole issue. We're running out of time. We're going to take some quick questions.
We have to wrap this in 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Just a quick comment. In addition to voting, what if we had the idea of, as Phil suggested, the false flag operation that was evident with Northwoods being planned and actually probably perpetrated on 9/11? What if we started a movement for legislation across the country for each state to ban false flag operations against their own citizens? This would create a situation where they would have to come out of the closet and say, okay, that's a good idea. And so, I mean, this is...
I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea, but the problem is, in my opinion, and I run for office, the party people don't want me because I won't kiss their butt, and that's why I've never really wanted to. But the problem is, the people in Washington, the people in your various states, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and everything, in government, the biggest thing they care about, and I hope it's different when we take over, I hope the Democrats take over next week, I've been Democrat all my life, the biggest thing they're concerned about is one thing, getting reelected. Basically, they don't give two hoots about any of us in this room, and I'll say it to their faces. And so it takes a real movement to change that. But we have to, don't give up. And I'm not giving up.
I just wanted to echo the gist of what the gentleman has just suggested, and that is some kind of initiative in states across the country to ban false flag operations. Well, I think before we get to that point, we've got to educate a lot more people about that. Half the country may suspect a cover-up, and a good percentage of them may suspect that 9/11 was a kind of was a false flag operation of sorts. But we need to educate with the most credible material that's available, and you know, we are in a propaganda war. You know, and if it's going to be a peaceful revolution, it's only going to be because we win the propaganda or the info war that is going on. And that war is a war for people's hearts and minds. And so that's the one we have to win. And I think a good place to start, in addition to the Operation Northwoods documents, which you can download as PDFs on Phil's sites and others, is Operation Gladio, which was investigated in Europe by 3 parliaments. The parliament in Italy, in Switzerland, and Belgium. They all held inquiries in Europe, in each parliament, about an operation where bombs were set off at train stations over the course of a decade or longer, where there were scores and scores of innocent killed. The bombings were blamed on communists, and the extreme right politically gained power and firmed their control and power over there. There's a 3-part series that the BBC did on Gladio that you can find at my website, 911citizenswatch.org. Just do Gladio search in the upper right-hand corner, and there's three links to the 3 separate parts. And if you have high-speed internet access, hope you do, you can watch those documentaries. They're very compelling, and they make the case. CIA and MI6, according to people who were convicted, had a role in these bombings. This was set up after the Soviets withdrew in order to have the infrastructure in place for a counterinsurgency in the case of a Soviet invasion of Europe. So here's the precedent. Here's the precedent for the setting up of the operation. and also for the investigation and exposure of false flag operations. So this is complicated, but if you learn the material, you can boil it down for people that they understand. And here you have convictions, you have it exposed, and you have parliaments investigating false flag terror operations. It's critical importance because we're living under this myth that there are terrorists out there, but we have to understand how the state apparatus has had relationships with these organizations and has manipulated them to advance certain ends.
And I see Joanne's getting very nervous. I'm going to take 30 seconds to just say the most important thing is don't give in to the fear and the despair. You know, 30 years ago, I lived in Massachusetts. In 1972, 49 states voted to re-elect a guy who was running an illegal, unconstitutional war, who was a crook, and who was violating the Constitution. One state, the one that I lived in, voted against this man. 49-1, we lost. And maybe you remember the "Don't Blame Me, I'm from Massachusetts" bumper sticker. I had it on my car, and I took it off less than 2 years later, when that very powerful president, who 49 states had voted to re-elect, was getting on a helicopter and going away in disgrace. Change is possible. Thank you.
I have a flyer on the back table there. Take it. You get my website on there.
We also have DVDs. Please buy a DVD and show it to your friends and
And
colleagues.
think of having a house party and screening it for your friends. We need your help. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.